I'm Jenna Seery, a bookseller and co-host of Poured Over, and today I am so excited to be joined by Larissa Pham, who is a wonderful author who has written a book that I have not been able to stop talking about for a few months now. It's called Discipline, and I think that there are so many people who are going to find something to love within its pages. So, Larissa, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk.
So, this book, when I first started, sometimes I like to start a book without reading the synopsis at all. And I like
Mhm.
to just go in blind to see whatever is going to happen. And that's what I did with this book. But I'd love for you to talk with us a little bit about how this story started for you and how you came to know that this was the story you wanted to tell.
Mm. Thank you for asking. It's always funny, like kind of going back to the origin of the story. But this novel started with the idea of a woman on tour for a book. She was traveling around, and the idea was that she was running from something. And I was like, well, what is she running from? And I think the secret, like the key that kind of unlocked everything. Well, what if she was on tour for something like a book that was about someone, and the other person found out? So I think like that dynamic was like the real, like original kind of heart of the story, and I think it still remains the heart of the novel. Is like this question of like, what happens when we write about others, right? And like, Christine, our protagonist, presupposes that the antagonist of her book is never going to have anything to do with it. But of course he does. Of course he finds it.
I love that. I love the idea of who gets to tell a story, and especially when it's something that's a little bit fiction, a little bit not, but who decides where that line is drawn. And when you put out a story, even if it's your own, there are still other people that are going to be affected. And I think for Christine, it's really interesting to watch her find all the ways the people in her life are affected by this story that she chose to tell.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would say, this book kind of stems from thinking about that question as a nonfiction writer as well as a fiction writer.
Mhm.
Having written about my family, having written about my own life, like I've had to navigate that question. And so I think it became like really rich terrain for this text.
Yeah, that is really interesting because I know you've written a lot about your own life,
Mm-hmm.
and it is something I think about when I've talked to other memoir authors, or even when you're just reading like a particularly interesting memoir, even if it's not super salacious, you do have to think, oh man, like what if someone wrote about me? Like how
Mm-hmm.
to picture yourself through someone else's eyes, and then especially in this case to have it be fictionalized. Christine talks about how the story changed and shaped and how maybe some
Mm-hmm.
pieces weren't exactly as they had happened, and to put those puzzle pieces together, it's really interesting to watch her navigate that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I wonder, so as we're in this space with Christine, how did you
Mm-hmm.
find her voice in this? Was it sort of there the entire time? How did you build that character?
I came to Christine because I really missed the first person. I was in graduate school. I was doing my MFA at Bennington when I started working on discipline. And my previous project at school, which, is kind of chilling for now, was a third person, kind of like sweeping, multi-generational novel. And I was enjoying writing in close third, but it was very difficult. And there were things that I couldn't do in third person, that I missed doing in first person. And so it was like this desire to play with first person, that kind of drove me towards this narrator who turned into Christine. And so I think I did actually meet her through her voice. Like for a while, she didn't have a name, and I was just kind of like spending time with the way she was seeing the world and following all these kind of like strange decisions she makes. And then when I found her name, I was like, okay, like her name is Christine, and then she really clarified more as a character, and I could begin to differentiate her a bit.
You really do let us uncover Christine in a way along with herself through this journey. I think we're really dropped in with her in the middle of something in a way. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, when the story starts, I was like, okay, it feels like I'm catching up a little bit to where she's
Mm.
at because she's already made so many decisions that are set
Mm-hmm.
in
Mm-hmm.
motion at the beginning. And as I sort of uncovered who she was through her voice and through that, really being able to be in her head, I was really impressed with how the pieces all came together. And I
Mm.
think that getting to uncover as it goes through that space in her mind is really important to how this story feels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so mediated through her. And like I wouldn't say she's like an unreliable narrator, but I would also say she's our sole narrator. And
Mhm.
that's kind of like the responsibility. And kind of yeah, we're very close to her the whole time.
I didn't ever feel like, oh, maybe I'm not getting the full story, but you really do feel like, oh, I'm getting Christine's story.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's moments in the text where she will tell the same story, or not the same story, but she'll talk about that central relationship that inspired the book with her mentor, and she'll kind of tell it several different times, and I think each time brings you a little bit closer to um, some kind of like quote unquote truth, but it's also to me I think that was intended to like bring us closer to her own understanding. Like her understanding is evolving, and so the way she tells that story is changing over time.
And I think too, seeing the response from others of that story is so
Mm.
interesting to
Mm-hmm.
unraveling the truth, whatever version of that is as well, because of course we have Christine's version that evolves, but then getting the versions mirrored back from her ex, from
Mm-hmm.
her friend from college,
Mm-hmm.
from these other people in her life, these other parties, it starts
Mm-hmm.
to make you think like, oh, isn't that the key, in a way, a key of storytelling, that no matter what you think or feel about the story, it will be reflected back to you.
Mm. Oh, I like that. That's not actually what I had in mind at all when I when I put her through those visits. But I like that she does need someone to mirror her back to herself, and like she is seeing herself through these relationships with others.
I really liked the relationship and the sort of journey she goes on with Frances,
Mm.
her friend
Mm-hmm.
from college,
Mm-hmm.
who is sort of living in some ways a similar or parallel or, sliding doors version of her
Mm-hmm.
life and what
Mm-hmm.
pieces could have been for her. And watching her navigate that relationship and the feelings, like some of it is so like you go like, oh, I'm like right
Mm.
there with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that chapter. I feel like that chapter really like opened up the novel for me in a way. It's the first chapter where the format of it kind of like breaks from the previous three. And yeah, I was really interested in this idea of like, what would it be like to have a friend who was like successful in precisely the way that you aren't, and that you always wanted to be? Like, how would that feel? So I'm really happy to hear that resonated with you as well.
It really got me thinking about what it means to be an artist
Mm.
and how we use that word
Mm-hmm.
and how it also works in conjunction with being a writer or being an author, and how they're considered like two separate things. It's like there's
Mm.
what if you say artist, what does that evoke? If you say writer, what does that evoke? And how does that who gets to use the identity of artist?
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I don't know if it's like as evident in this book, but something that I've been thinking about a lot is like in fiction is like like which women in a family or in like a community get to become the artists. So this kind of maybe goes with that slant, right? Like, what are the conditions that allowed
Mhm.
Frances to be successful, and what are the sacrifices that she makes, and the judgments that Christine has of her? And she's like, oh, I don't know, she's kind of a sellout, or like she's like, I don't know,
Yeah.
she's kind of like tuning her art to like the white gaze a little bit. Um, like what are those trade-offs that both of these women are engaged in order to pursue the art that they've chosen?
And there is so much, there's pressure in general on the idea of living a creative life. And I think it gets like even more heightened in many ways for women of color. There's like so much expectation on what this is and how to do it the right way or the impressive way. And there's parts where Christine talks about like what she really wanted out of painting, what she really wanted
Mhm.
out of this. Was it to be famous? Was it to create the pieces? It's such an
Mhm.
interesting idea to really boil down to like, do you have to be talented to be an artist, or using the word good? Do you have to be good to be an artist? I was really thinking about that a lot as I was watching
Mhm.
Christine's journey,
Mhm. Mhm.
and what the consequence of that is too for being creative. There's so much pressure, when she's telling these stories. How does she what Who is she at the end of the day
Mm.
with this book that she's written and these
Mhm.
paintings that she hasn't created? Who is
Mhm.
she at the end of the day in relation to all this? I was really it's it's something I was thinking about. Like I said, I've been thinking about this book a lot since I've read it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you bring that up now because I think about how, at least for both Christine and her friend Frances, like, there is kind of a career aspect to their idea of success, right? Like, they're both like, Frances obviously is showing in galleries, and then Christine has published a book. So in a way, they've both arrived in their chosen fields. And Christine admits to Frances that she did not continue painting once she left the program, even though she could have. Like, there is this avenue where you make art just for yourself, and you don't show it to anyone else. And for whatever reason, Christine is like, no, like, she's not actually interested in that. Like, there is something in her that really wants to be seen. Um, and maybe that's part of why, like, I found that initial tension, that question of, like, what happens if you write something and someone sees it and disagrees with you, or feels that it went differently. um, that's like that fear is in opposition to the desire to be seen, right? The desire to make something and have people respond to it. So it's a very interesting tension when we think about, like, making and showing our art to the world.
And for Christine, who, for whatever reason and whatever piece of this doesn't show her ex, her book
Mhm.
doesn't
Mhm.
explain the entirety of the process until it's done. And like
Mhm.
what that brings into the entire situation, the way that sort of blows up.
Mhm.
And it's
Mhm.
again that thing of, who do you choose to tell and when, and
Mhm.
what happens.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think of Christine as I would be curious to know what your impression of her is. I think of her as a little bit of a repressed person, in that she's made this choice to kind of, like, completely erase her past as a painter, in order to move forward. I would say, after leaving school and everything that goes down with her and her mentor. And so she makes this choice to kind of, like, push all of that away. And so she hides herself from the people who are closest to her. And I think that was interesting to me, was, like, figuring out, like, who knows what about Christine, and where are those relationships more vulnerable. And, you know, what does it mean for her to kind of have to maintain this fiction, which is ultimately kind of brittle, right? Like, she's trying to pretend that something didn't happen, and then when she does acknowledge it happened, she can only tell it her way. It's not really how life works.
Oh, and there was a tension in this book that I really felt very heavily, which is the idea that as soon as it's almost like she thinks she can control how this happens by writing it in her novel
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
telling people in her way. And as soon as it's out, watching her realize that now she does not have control over it anymore. The control that she thought she had by maybe telling her own story and writing it in her own way is gone when someone else reads it and reads it their way, or when the person
Mhm.
who she's writing about reads it and reads it his way.
Mhm.
and watching that like sort of crumble and slip away
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
such a, you're like, ooh, you feel it, because I feel like everyone, even though like this is like a very heightened version of that, I think everyone has that where they've experienced something, that same feeling of like, I thought I could control this and maybe I can't.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, she really thinks that like it's going to it's gonna like kind of burn out any other story. Um, but what she learns is that you can't prevent someone else's story from coming up against your own, and that it takes courage to kind of confront that person.
It's very like, there are several moments in this book where I was like, oh, is that what she's gonna do? And then whether she
Mm,
did or didn't do the thing that I was like nervous about, it just really makes you think how quickly things change. How
mm,
quickly in this story she goes from thinking everything is going to exist in this way to being in a completely different place. I think she would have never imagined. Like I can't, I wonder if she would have made the same choices had she known where it was going to lead.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, that was something that was really fun about writing her was Christine, she kind of just like she's going with the flow. Like she's like, why not? Why not meet up with this random guy who has my suitcase? Like, sure, I'll go to the museum with him. Like, sure. Like, oh, I'm running into my ex. Like, sure, I'll go back to his place. Like, why not? And I think it's like, it's a very convenient character for a protagonist of a book to have because it means that things kind of happen. Um, but I think this curiosity is a big part of Christine's character. Like she is curious about the world and she is curious about people. And I believe that like she's she's trying to like understand how people work would be my guess for why she goes on all these interesting little
Yes.
side quests, as you might say.
She is the queen of the side quests in this. There, I
Yeah.
was like, okay, we're doing it. And for me, that is stressful because it is not how I exist on this planet. But I really
Mm,
love reading about it because it makes me think like, oh yeah, free will. You can just
hmm.
do that. And she takes it to the extreme in a lot of ways.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She's willing to go there, but I think that is what made her so fun to spend time with, and so much fun to write.
And I think what again would make her an artist in a lot of ways. Like I think you to create something in that way, you have to be willing to go there because you
Mm,
can't stop halfway. For
hmm.
her existence, when she was painting, the way she would describe it, the process, the way she felt, like it's a full send. And I think
Mm,
that in
hmm.
writing and life, I think she did the same. At least that's the way it came, from my perspective. I was like, and I respect it because she's experiencing her life.
Hmm. Hmm.
I want to talk a little bit about the painting piece as well,
Okay.
because I think that's such an important aspect of this story is not just the, describing painting, but, talking about painters, talking about practice, talking about the way things look, the tactile piece of painting, what it takes to prepare a canvas, what it takes to, what something looks like when it's still wet, when it's in progress. A lot of this was like brand new to me and I was
Mm,
obsessed because I get really invested when I'm reading and I start googling things because I have to know. I'm like, when you describe, like I said, the preparation of a canvas, what does it take to
hmm.
start a painting? I've never thought about that before.
Mm, hmm. That's a big part of the
Of course,
book.
and it's so interesting because the idea is, of course you can't just start, but what does it take to get there? And I
Hmm.
really love that piece.
Thank you. Yeah, I love writing about painting and painters and the act of painting. It's so physical, right? It's so tactile. Um, and I studied painting in undergrad. Um, so I have like a bodily felt sense of what those things are like. Um, but I think maybe I have experience with this, so it's not quite the same. But I think one of the pleasures of writing fiction is that you can learn about other jobs that you don't have. Like I always wanted to assign this as a prompt. Whenever the next time I teach fiction, I'll do it. But like writing fiction is a wonderful way to explore like a different thing that you don't normally do, and so yeah, making Christine an artist, like a visual artist, and getting to bring in the texture and language of painting. It was just purely enjoyable for me. But I'm glad that it also maybe served an educational purpose as well. It wasn't just that dressing.
No, and I think for so many readers, myself included, the same thing exists in reading as you were just describing in writing, that I get
Mm.
to envision being a painter and what that feels like the same way. I
Mm-hmm.
putting yourself in Christine's shoes, in her head, in her body as she's experiencing these things. I'll probably never make a painting on that scale. Don't know, not counting it out, but
Mm-hmm.
I may not, or so many other, I hope to not experience some of the things in this book. We'll see. But to experience it in that way is like, that's one of the joys of reading fiction, I think, for me, is to
Mm-hmm.
really be inside of a world that is very different from my own.
Yeah, no, same here. I love reading books that take you somewhere else. Even if the setting is, very much like our own.
Yes. And I think like being able to, Christine kind of goes on a little bit of a journey across the country, and she's in all
Mhm.
these very different physical spaces as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
She's in, someone's house with a creepy curtain in, or a creepy plastic sheet in New
Mhm.
Mexico. She is in
Mhm.
Chicago. She is in transit in between. And I think
Mhm.
like so much of that really works to take this novel out of time and place a little bit. I felt like
Mhm.
even though we are getting some markers of time,
Mhm.
for so much of it, I was like, I don't know, I'm right now with her. And it felt like
Mhm.
that's where she is too. In a lot of ways, she is right then.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, I start the book in an airport, which is not a new thing. Like Outline, the Rachel Cusk book begins like on a plane, and
Mhm.
like Mouth to Mouth by Antoine Wilson begins also at an airport. But there is something about that liminal space, right, of the travel narrative of the journey, that kind of encourages the reader to have to kind of keep up, right? We're like, okay, like where are we going next? Um, and I think, it was very important to me that like Christine was always on the move, that she was not at home, that we don't see her in New York City, which is, where she lives. But that we only see her in these other foreign places, and she's always like living out of her suitcase, and like, she's like getting dressed, and like things are wrinkly, and like, she's she's in this like in between space, because she's kind of in this in between time in her life, where she can kind of inform the direction of her life. Maybe she doesn't know that she's informing the direction of her life with these decisions she's making. Um, and I had like an internal timeline, right? For like, I was like, okay, like a week here, like a couple days here, like okay. And the second half of the book has like maybe a slightly more clear timeline, because she's in one place for the duration of it. But yeah, at the same time, I wanted to have a light touch with, um, things that might tie it too closely to uh, reality. Like I wanted it to feel kind of timeless in a way. Like she has Instagram, and she uses a computer, but I wanted it to feel like, a reader could kind of pick it up and feel like it was still very current in some way.
And I think there's also just, I don't know, because she's moving around so much, and I don't know if maybe this is just because I was in a whatever headspace I was in reading it, but there is
Mm.
almost an unreal quality to what she's
Mm.
experiencing. She's getting these like disembodied emails.
Mhm.
She's, spending so much time in her own head. She's spending so much time alone that she is
Mhm.
like really caught in her own feelings. It's sort of like, that this is happening and you're trusting that she's really experiencing everything. But yet there's this like unreality that she's somehow stepped outside of her life in a way.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And in a way she has, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
she's like left her apartment, she's like out of this relationship. She's embarking on this like really ambitious like multi-city tour, which side note, I've like started scheduling. I'm almost done scheduling my own tour and I'm like, how did Christine do this? Like I'm like, she's like going to so many places. I'm not going to so many places. Um, but you know, you have a lot of time when you're trying to run away from your life, which is what she's trying to do. But yeah, there is like a surreality to it. Maybe it's a word. But I don't know. I have kind of done like long trips, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it does start to feel like less real by like week 3 when you're like still living out of a suitcase and you're like at like in like the third country you've been in like
Right.
in a month and you're like I don't really know like what's going
Right.
on.
You're like talking to people you'll never see again. There's like
Yeah.
this very, she's having these like kind of in-depth conversations and profound conversations with strangers that are, going to be gone or people from her past. It's
Mhm.
really interesting, especially too because she's like decidedly not writing, though she keeps, thinking
Mhm.
about it, and she's decidedly in a lot of ways not connecting to her own like present life, but spending a lot of time in the past.
Mhm.
And it really made me think like, oh man, what is going to come next? Like what I can't
Mm.
even, what when you have this stepping outside of your own life and all of this transition, how do you continue? That's discipline too, which, of course
Mhm.
is the discipline extended universe, of course, that we're going to
Mhm.
imagine outside of this. But it's such an interesting snapshot. And I think, of course, having the book be so short that it is just this
Mm.
like tight experience, this one encapsulated moment. I really like that.
Mm.
Going into a book knowing, okay, I can see the page count. So I know I'm getting something that is going to be just this one moment.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah, it felt really important to have like a clear span of time. And I think it had to start where it started and it needed to end where it ended. And like,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I don't think the reader really needs to be taken through the whole timeline in chronological
Mm-hmm.
order. Um, and I think my mode is also to move back and forth in time. I don't know why. I just love doing it. I love when characters remember things. And so Christine is doing a lot of remembering over the course of the book. But yeah, we're really only hanging out with her for a couple weeks. Yeah,
Love
maybe
that.
like a month and a
And
half. Yeah.
I love the idea of knowing. I mean, I'm kind of talking around the end of the book because I feel like there's a lot of stuff that I want to leave for readers to experience. But I will ask, did you know that this was how the book was going to end when you started?
Anyone listening, like make it to the end,
Make it to
make
the
it to
end.
part 2.
It's so worth it.
Yeah. Well, I think I have my copy here. I'm like, yeah, on the copy we know that Christine does end up where she's not
Yes.
supposed to be.
Yes.
She does end up in Maine. Um, but yes, regarding the ending, yeah, it kind of arrived to me. Um, it wasn't there in the very beginning. In the very beginning, I think I was just like having her move through the world and trying to figure out, you know, where is she going to go and what is
Mhm.
this, how is she going to react to these messages that the old painter, her old mentor, is sending her. Like I felt like I just needed to figure out what she was going to do in response. And then once I figured out how they would interact, I started thinking about like, okay, like what's an ending that makes sense, given this relationship and given the sort of narrative weight that has been built up. So yeah, then I had a pretty clear sense of what was going to happen, but I had to figure out how to get them there. And that was kind of the most interesting part of the process, was like kind of doing this sort of like plot calculus to figure out like how we were going to kind of stick the landing.
Did you write chronologically? Like, did you write all the way through, or were you jumping the scenes? Because there are some like scenes that sort of, I think, you could pull out, but I know sometimes people are like, nope, I have to write this all as it's going to be in
Hmm.
order.
Yeah. It was drilled into me by an instructor at graduate school, Alice Madison, who I'm very, very fond of, wonderful instructor. But she was like, I want to, if you're going to write a novel with me, like you need to start at the beginning and write through to the end. She's like, I'm not going to read your chapters out of order. Which makes sense when I think about
Mm-hmm.
it, because like, if the characters' relationships are changing or something, like, how are you going to know if they're like jumping around? It's like shooting a movie out of order. Like, it just seems like so hard to me, even though I know that's what people do. So I wrote this like in the order that you're reading it. It was very important to have the chronology squared away. Just because, yeah, she's going so many different places and there are so many like sequential events. But then there were moments where I did go back and I was like, oh, we could kind of add a memory here. Like this feels like a good place to like introduce some information. Or, oh, I want to build out this moment here a little bit more. But yeah, start on page 1, end on page 200 and whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. I think for me that's the way like it always makes sense because I think too if you're writing and as you're watching these relationships build, you're watching this character grow in the book, like of course it makes sense that as you're writing it that's going to come along with what you're
Mhm.
doing,
Mhm.
especially when it's someone going through it like Christine.
Yeah, it's like I need to get to know the character and see what she's going through because I can probably learn from
Hmm.
her and from the other characters too. Um yeah, like I mean when she starts talking to the old painter, like that really was like I was like, "Oh my gosh, like this relationship is so interesting and I'm learning so much from these characters, like watching them interact." I actually am not in control of this. Like, it's like I'm
No.
writing the dialogue and I'm like, "Oh, this is so interesting." Um
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I love hearing the kind of idea that like your characters can surprise you, your book can surprise you, and as you write and as you go through, or things. I always want to, I think it's interesting. People are like, "Oh, I didn't anticipate this, but it was there when I got to that. It was like, of course, this is what's going to happen next." And to imagine, sort of, yeah, that there is this like really complicated relationship that it would be tough to for us as readers to understand really what was going to happen unless we had everything else already,
Mhm.
that we'd read, that we'd experienced along with her. So it makes sense that it's a similar sort of a similar process to write it.
Yeah, like all that work you've done in the beginning kind of lights the way um, for the ending or for further development with the characters. So I'm sure there's a way to do it, and I think this book it has one point of view, but I imagine maybe with multiple POVs you could have a little bit more leeway with timeline. Um, but I'm the kind of writer who I don't like to plan everything out exactly because I find that can kind of calcify my work.
Mhm.
If I have too strong of an idea of what something is going to be, it can kind of almost limit the possibility. Um, so yeah, keeping that space open um, and letting the kind of power of the book like accumulate over time feels useful. I think it's the only way I can work.
It's good to know that. And who knows, like you said, I mean, there's so many different types of novel, there's so many different outcomes. It's like the sky's the limit. You can keep going. But I think, to be like, no, this is what this book needs is
Mhm.
a powerful
Mhm.
thought.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. I have to go to my favorite question now, which is to
Ooh.
talk a little bit about some of your literary influences and books and authors that you love.
Okay.
And don't
Uh,
worry, don't panic because every time I ask this, everyone's like, "Now I've forgotten every book I've ever read."
I know it's like what is a book even? Like what have I read? Well, I think two really obvious influences for me for this text are the Outline trilogy, the Rachel
Mhm.
Cusk, and then Intimacies by Katie Kitamura. Um,
Mhm.
and I think what those novels share is like this interest in human relationships and conversation. Um, and I just love the gravitas in Intimacies. Like I love that there is a sense of tension that's being built through the book, um, but it's not because people are in like, capital D danger. It's because like these relationships are being like turned and turned and tightened and tightened, and you feel for everyone. You feel for these characters. Um, and then with the outline trilogy, like I was really interested in the conversations that, Cusk is using to kind of unspool information. And I like the idea of, a really capacious first person that encompasses multiple like stories. Even like, you start reading something, you're like, oh, this wasn't first person, but we're in third person. But oh, I see, it's because someone is telling someone else's story. Someone is relating a story they've been told. Another book that is kind of like that is White on White by Isabel Savaz, who is a really wonderful writer who I really admire. So I feel like those are kind of like books that I had in mind. I was also thinking about, I always get the title of this book a little mixed up. I think it's What Are You Going Through by Sigrid Nunez. Yeah, love Nunez, like so cool. And that book, I think, just really informed like some of the philosophical questions of discipline. And then, I mean, they're also just books that I really love that
Tell me
maybe
about them.
stylistically don't quite, maybe you can't see the imprint quite as much. The Roundhouse,
Oh.
which I read in grad school on a friend's recommendation, just like perfect tension, like incredible. Like I was really interested in like figuring out how to make discipline feel like the thrilleriest thriller. We do the thrilliest, sure,
Yep.
thriller that I could write conceivably. And so I really looked to Erdrich to like figure out how to do that. And what she does in that book is she withholds information, but it's in the way of like, oh no, what's he gonna do? And just enough to know like, okay, this character is probably okay. This character is definitely not okay. But you like have to see how they get there. And in a similar vein-ish, Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Really incredible book. I read that also, I think, for the very first time, like so belated in grad school, and it just like blew me away. I really do think it's like a perfect novel. But he also does something with timing where you enter the text and you're like, something really bad is going to happen to Giovanni, but we don't know why that is. And so the book is kind of, you're moving forward and backward at the same time. And I think in general, I'm really interested in narratives that kind of have this like dual, almost like propulsion. Like we're moving forward to figure out what's going to happen, but the reason that things are happening is because of something that happened in the past, which we're also going to learn about as time goes on. There's something that really just like tickles me about those kinds of narratives.
Yeah.
Okay, last book.
Hit me.
while I'm listing them all off,
Hmm.
is the Book of Goose by Yiyun.
Yeah.
Really fantastic book. And that one I looked at a lot. Actually did this really deranged thing also in grad school where I was like, I need to figure out pacing. So I literally like plotted that book like according to emotional intensity to figure out like how it was structured. And I was like, oh, like the climax is always way earlier than you think it is. And that was very valuable. And I also think Yiyun is just a really fabulous writer. So those are some that are kind of on the top of mind right now.
Love it. I love that because I think one, of course, being able to say, yeah, these are the books that maybe pointed to this novel in particular, but I think it's all cumulative, right? So everything we
Mm-hmm.
read, no matter what, it's all in there. And I think it
Mm-hmm.
informs readers the same way. When I read a book, I'm also reading it along with everything else I've ever read. So I
Mm-hmm.
think it's great to hear those sort of connections on your end because I know it just like expands it all out for us.
Yeah, I feel like they're all in there, and like I teach, so I
Mhm.
feel like I have like these like books as references on deck because I like to tell my students about like things that are happening in these texts. Yeah, it's like maybe you can see the imprint, maybe you can't. I'm like trying to like
I think
visualize
they'll
the
see
mental
it.
map.
Of course.
Yeah.
No, I'm so excited for people to read Discipline and to meet Christine and to go on this journey along with her, because I think there's so many things that people can pull out to relate to their own life. There's so many things where, of course, I imagine most people haven't experienced this exact undertaking that she's on, but there's so
Hmm.
many pieces that, whether you are an artist, whether you've created, whether you've, had the piece of telling a story and getting these varying reactions. I think there's so much in there for people to understand and to know.
Hmm. Thank you. Yeah, I think just what you said made me think of like how at the end of the day, and also maybe in the beginning of the book, like Christine is harmed. She feels like she's been harmed, and she
Mhm.
wants to respond to that, right? She wants to make it right, and she finds one way to do it, and then maybe by the end of the book, she's figured out another way to navigate this experience. But I feel like that is something that feels very universal to me.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and for talking about Discipline. Like I said, I can't wait for people to pick this up.
Thank you so much for having me. So much fun talking.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.